live. We are live, so I'm going to kick off my getting started here, and here we go. Well, good morning, podcasters. Today is Thursday, June 11, 2026, and today we've got Hall of Fame Podcasting Room. Yes, that's our second of the week on the show, and we're going to talk about what separates a forgettable interview from one that listeners remember for years. So if you're listening live on Clubhouse, hit the share button top right-hand side of the screen and share it however Clubhouse lets you. If you want to join us live on the video, go to podcastingmorningchat.com/join us. And if you're catching us via podcast, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc., please share this episode with a fellow podcaster. Now give me about 30 seconds and we'll get things going. Thank you so much for being here today.
The Podcasting Morning Show is powered by Ironic Media, helping podcasters launch, polish, and grow great shows. And by Content Creators Accountant, helping creators build real business behind their content.
Well, good morning again, everyone. Welcome to the Podcasting Morning Show. Thank you so much for being here. I am your host today, filling in for Mark Ronick, who continues his adventure volunteering. Now, joining me on stage today, we've got DR Fay, Sid Meadows, and joining us from the audience, we've got Ty Tutoring, aka Nikki, and John Jamingo. And we've also got Dave Jackson in the house, and DR is going to introduce him in just a few minutes. So thank you for everyone being here. We've got an incredible show for you this morning. You know that feeling when you listen to a podcast interview and the guest says something that just stops you in your tracks? Well, guess what, friends? That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because the host did the work before the record button was ever pressed. And today we're going to learn exactly what that work order looks like from someone who's been doing it at the highest level for over 20 years. Now, before we get to today's show, I just want to remind everybody, if you're interested in having your show spotlighted on our show, we'd love to hear from you. We can go directly to podcastingmorningshow.com/spotlight. Just record a 60-second spot. Send that over to us. Again, that's podcastingmorningshow.com/spotlight. So, DR, I'm going to have you introduce our guest here this morning.
Absolutely. You know, today we are joined by someone who has shaped the way so many of us think about podcasting. Dave Jackson is the founder of the School of Podcasting, a Hall of Fame podcast coach, speaker, consultant, and the author of Profit from Your Podcast. He's helped hundreds and hundreds of podcasters plan, launch, grow, and improve their show. And he's done it with a kind of a practical, no-nonsense advice this industry kind of desperately needs. So I am truly honored to welcome someone who has had a lasting impact on podcasting, on the podcasting space, and certainly my own work. So please welcome Dave Jackson. Hi, Dave. Good to have you.
Happy to be here. Always great to hang out with you guys.
So, Dave, for anyone in our community who hasn't found you yet, give us the 30-second version of your podcasting origin story. I like to start there.
Boy, that's 30 seconds. That is not my strong suit. Discovered podcasting in 2005, did a quick Google search for it, and there was 1.5 pages on podcasting at the time. Over the 20 years, I learned what to do and what not to do, and went from everywhere from, making a horrible version of the School of Podcasting to cleaning it up to, at that time, I was still teaching in the corporate world. When that went away, because everybody already knew Microsoft Office, I was like, I'd like to get a job in podcasting. And because of my podcast and the connections I'd made, I got a job at Libsyn. I was at Libsyn for 8 years. And 2 years ago, I had had enough of Libsyn, loved the people over there, but didn't love the direction they were going in, and became the head of podcasting at Podpage. So I don't know if that was 30 seconds, but that's as close as I can get.
No, I think you did a fantastic job, Dave. So let's start at the very beginning of the process.
Yeah.
When you agree to have a guest on your show, what happens next? I want you to walk us through exactly what you do before that interview even takes place.
Yeah, so I will have done some research And I've learned, I just did a couple where I didn't do my research, and I was like, oh, Dave, this is why you do your research. They had said some really cool stuff on Facebook, and that's where I was like, I need to go back to doing pre-interviews just to eliminate the, when you find out that the guest you're interviewing about growing your show doesn't have a website, you're like, that might be a red flag. But once I get somebody, and most of the time it's somebody I've met in person, and then I go, ooh, you got to come on my show. And once they're here, I have to let them know, okay, here's what we're going to talk about. Not so much the questions, but here's the topic we're going to talk about. And like I had one woman on that could have talked about work-life balance. She could have talked about the music industry. And I said, no, the theme is find out what your audience wants and give it to them, because she was getting her music streamed in Netflix. She was getting into movies and stuff and making royalties on that. And I said, so that's really that's a theme I talk about all the time. Figure out who your audience is and give it to them. And that's how you went from not making any money in the music industry. She'd been on 2 different record labels, and welcome to the record industry. She got dropped twice, but she was making money now. And I said, well, let's examine that. And when I did, it was like, oh, I talk about that all the time. So I let her know, like, we're not going to be talking about work-life balance. We're not going to be talking about this and that. So just kind of let them know where they're going. If it's usually the people I talk to have already been on a podcast, but if they haven't, I will explain to them it's not radio. If you mess up on anything, just pause 10 seconds and we can do it again. I let them know who my audience is. So if you want to get kind of nerdy, my audience loves nerdy. So feel free to go into the weeds and talk about kilobits per second and bit rates and all that stuff. So I give them an idea of why they're here, who's listening, and kind of where we're going.
DR, I know you've got a question, so go ahead, DR.
Yeah. So, there's like 2 schools of thought here. Do you give the person who you're interviewing, do you give them the questions beforehand?
I don't. I give them a topic. Like, hey, today we're going to talk about matching your content to your audience. That's the theme. So they know where we're going to go. I'll also do that. I'll be like, hey, I'm going to say, thanks for coming on the show. You can say, thanks for being here. And the first question is going to be, when did you know you wanted to start a podcast? I always let them know what the first one is, just so they can start thinking about that.
Right.
And it only happened, I think it's twice, so not a lot, but I used to give people the questions, and then I had somebody go, thanks, Dave. Boy, that's a great question. I remember and they just completely written out their answers beforehand, and I was like, this is, and so I was like, all right, well, that's one person. And then it happened a couple years later, and somebody did the same thing. Thanks, Dave. I'm so glad to be here. And I was like, okay, in the future, I'm just going to say, this is why you're here. Here's the topic. And then, because if you don't give them any idea, then you're relying on your guest's ability to do improv. And some people are not great at that.
Exactly.
So I kind of let them know what's going on. I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm trying to get Tom Buck on my show. And Tom could talk about gear. He could talk about all sorts of stuff. But I love that Tom has integrity. And so I'm like, hey, I heard you talk about how you handle reviews and how you do this and that. And on another show he was explaining how there are companies that do really like pretty black hat stuff where they're like, hey, will you go, we'll give you $20 if you go leave us a review. And he says no. And I was like, okay. I'm like, I would love to have you come on and talk about integrity and why it's important. And so we keep kind of almost getting it there. You know how you do that via email, and then he gets busy and I get busy. But that would be an example of, I'd love to have Tom Buck on to talk about integrity. And then from there, you can obviously expand out. But that's the theme I'm going for.
Cool.
Dave, I got a question for you. So you talk about researching a guest before the interview. What does that research actually look like? How deep do you go into that research?
I usually just go into either Google, or I use Pocket Cast, and I will type in, Ralph Estep Jr. interview, and then I'll see how many come up, and I make a playlist of those. And then when I'm listening, the thing I love about Pocket Cast is you can make bookmarks just like in Audible. And so any good question, I will make a bookmark, and then you can leave like the bookmark might be called "Great Question, No Follow-Up," because whoever was interviewing them asked a great question. I'm waiting for the follow-up question, and there wasn't one. And I was like, oh, I got to go back and find out what happened. And for me, I remember when Jordan Harbinger from the Jordan Harbinger show had started it. He had left his old show, and that it was a bit of a debacle, and he was in a legal thing. And so people had kind of asked him, and he'd be like, well, I'm not really sure I can talk about that or whatever. And I went further. I actually was like, well, did this happen? Or then, and finally he got to a point. He's like, I cannot, I'm not sure if I should. He was like, no, we're as far back as we can go. And so, yeah, listening to other episodes. And then there are times when I always say, if you can, ask different questions. Because if you want, I just had a weird situation happen a couple weeks ago where I decided I'm going to try something new. I'm going to batch interview. So I went to Podmatch and I had 4 almost back-to-back interviews with people, and I didn't do any research on them. I was just like, hey, if you want to have me, I'm going on your show. And so I had 4 interviews in one night, and I'm here to tell you, I almost thought there was like a box on the wall in case of Dave Jackson interview break, and here's your 10 questions. Because I remember question number 3 for all of them was the same, which was some podcasts fail and some don't. What's the difference? Because a lot of them die after episode 7. And when I heard that like the 3rd time, I'm like, is somebody getting these out of ChatGPT or something like that? So if you want your audience to share it, you got to ask different questions. But on the other hand, there are some questions. It's like, if I'm going to see Leonard Skinner, I want to hear Freebird. And so every guest has their Freebird answer, right? You're like, oh, that's so good. My audience has to hear that. And so I interviewed Justin Moore, who wrote the book Sponsor Magnet. And I listened to like 3 or 4 interviews looking for something that somebody didn't ask him. And they were all pretty good interviews, and they were all really good answers. And when he showed up, I said, Justin, I hate to do this to you. And he's like, what? I go, dude, I'm going to walk you through your greatest hits. I go, because my audience hasn't heard those yet. So I also then didn't expect Justin to share it because it was his greatest hits. His audience has already heard that stuff.
So let's get into the details. So how do you prepare yourself both mentally and technically before that guest joins in? Is there a ritual that you go through, Dave? Is there some things that you do? You check this, you do that. What does that look like for you?
For me, my perfect guest is someone who is either has a really good because of my podcast story. So I've done this and now I've got sponsors, or I've done this and it grew my audience by 5x, whatever that is. And it's something my audience can do and hopefully reproduce the results. There's that. There are, in some cases, I'm interviewing somebody about their technology, or if it's just an inspirational story. So I just got the other day I pulled out a coffee mug, and there's I believe his name is Pedro. I'm like 90% sure that, but he does My Stuttering Life. So it's a guy who has a pretty bad stutter that does a podcast about like, hey, this is what happens. I stutter. And I looked at the coffee mug. I've never had him on my show. I go, that would be an inspirational story of like, hey, you person that doesn't have a stutter, and you're sitting here worrying if anybody would listen to me, and I might look silly if I do that. This guy stutters and he's got a podcast. So get off your butt, turn on the microphone, and start a podcast. So it kind of varies, but they're all, it's kind of one of those things where when I talk to someone or hear about it, I go, oh, you know what? Ken Blanchard, Kim Newlove, Ralph, like I'm thinking of my audience, and I'm like, what would they say if I said, should I have this person on my show? They're like, yes, please get that person on the show.
So now you've done the prep work. The guest is in the room. You hit the record button, which I just realized I forgot to do on my Rodecaster. So hopefully Ecamm will make a great recording today. But Dave, what separates a host who is just running through their question list from a host who is truly in the conversation? Because I think that's a challenge for all of us as we're preparing for an interview like I was preparing for today. I've got a list of questions I want to ask you, but what separates that person just going through that list? Because you mentioned that when you did those batch interviews, what separates that person from that host is truly having a conversation?
Yeah, follow-up questions. My favorite is where I will say an answer expecting a follow-up question. Like I could say something. In fact, there are I swear I'm going to do this eventually. There are times when I'm being interviewed and the person has their questions and they're like, great, or excellent. let me ask you this question, which you don't say in a conversation. You just ask the question, and they've got their list. But I just said something that just screamed follow-up question. And I swear someday, because you, as the interviewee, there are times when you're like, oh, we're just going to go through the questions. Okay, I get it. And I swear the next time I get into one of those, I'm going to say something like, and that's when I shot a man for snoring, just so they can go, great. What was your aha moment? And just go on to the next thing. Mark Maron was at Podcast Movement years ago, and somebody asked him, they go, what's the key to a great interview? And he said, oh, it's easy, listening. And it really is. So I always have, kind of like you, Ralph, I always have on my left-hand side, I have a list of questions that I think, yeah, this should be enough for an interview. And then on the right-hand side, I have an empty piece of paper with a pen that doesn't click. And then what I'm doing is if I hear, we were talking about the woman before that was in the music industry, and she said, I knew I had to do something to stand out. And I just, on my piece of paper, I just wrote down stand out. And then I went back to listening, because the problem is you're sitting there going, okay, I got to remember to ask standing out, standing out, standing out while you're listening. And then she says something else and you're like, okay, standing out and the price of whatever, standing out and the price, standing out the price. And you're still trying to listen. So if you just write it down, I'm not writing down the question. I'm just writing down enough to trigger, oh yeah, I need to ask her about standing out. And that's 9 times out of 10, your follow-up questions are better than the ones you had on your pre-made paper. And there are times when I've had one question that I started off with, and the rest were just follow-ups because they've unleashed a story. And you're like, well, wait a minute, what were you thinking when you did that? And like, well, what did that feel like? And et cetera, et cetera. And you're walking them through a story. That's 9 times out of 10 better than what's your favorite microphone. So it's one of those things where really listening and asking follow-up questions and asking the follow-up questions that your audience would ask if they were in the chair.
DR, I'm going to go to you in just one second, but I just want to mention something Gabe said in the chat on Clubhouse. He said, yes, one of the best things that I've learned and developed in my time as a host is to be an active listener. And Dave, how does that strike you? Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It's really, because what happens is you don't realize how your brain is just going crazy trying to remember as you listen. And then it's like having 2 kids, right? One under each arm. And then somebody hands you another kid. You're like, And so by writing these things down, you don't have to hold on to them and you can just go back to listening.
Go ahead, DR. I think you've got a question for Dave.
Yeah. So you've been interviewing people for many, many years. Is there anything that stands out to you as the interview that maybe you went into it really not expecting too much and man, it just blew you away?
That's a good question.
DR has stumped Dave. I love it.
Well, because most of the time I know the answer before I ask the question, or I have a pretty good idea. So I'm usually not surprised. The one that, in terms of it blew me away, is I had, some quote big names on my show that everybody knew. And, people were like, okay, that was cool. And then I brought in this guy named Glenn Hebert from the Horse Radio Network. And
Don't
Glenn
be
came
boring.
on. Yeah, that was it. And he came on and gave like not only strategies, but strategies that worked. And so like at the School of Podcasting, Glenn is a verb. I'm like, well, how did you do that? And they're like, Glenn the Geeked it. And so that was a case. Glenn's been on my show probably 5 or 6 times. He doesn't even have to ask anymore. He'll just be like, hey, I got something. I'm like, all right, schedule it, and just the stuff that people are like, man, I never thought of that. Or like one of his things was he's all about horses. So he went to like the top horse magazines and he said, look in the back. He goes, the little itty bitty ads. He goes, because those people have a budget. And he goes, and then call the magazine and find out how much it would be to advertise in the little itty bitty spaces. He goes, because then you know how much those people are paying. He goes, and then you go to those sponsors and undercut the magazine. And it's just basic math. But everybody went, just like DR did. You're like, ooh, yeah, I never thought of that. Because if you're looking for sponsors, you need somebody with a budget. And it was just stuff like that that you're like, oh, and then he'd say another one, like, oh, I never thought of that. So that was one where I had a lot of comments. They're like, who was that guy? So it's interesting. I know John Lee Dumas who's got a really, I'll put it this way. John made so much money with this podcast, he moved to Puerto Rico. So that's a successful podcast. And he was mentioned in Time Magazine. And he said he was really obviously proud of himself, being mentioned in Time Magazine. He goes, didn't move the needle. He goes, appearing on Pat Flynn's show, though, he goes, because you've got that relationship with your audience. He goes, I got more juice from Pat Flynn's audience than I did being in Time Magazine. So that's a nice statement to that relationship that podcasters have with their audience.
So, Dave, I have a follow-up to that. What do you think is the biggest mistake you see podcast hosts make in the middle of an interview?
In the middle? Not editing, really. It's where somebody goes, so have you ever had a time when you didn't think you were going to be successful and, you were worried about it, and then you went and the person goes, no, not really. And I'm like, okay, why did you keep that question there? Unless it's surprising that this person never felt that way. There are times where I think that's the big one is editing, because there are times when I go, I'll just hear things. When I edit my interviews, 90% of what I'm cutting out is not the guest, it's me, because I will give a huge, sometimes way too much background information. I'll be like, hey, I know there was a time when you tried this and it led to that, and that was really cool, and you did this, and you and then finally I will say, so what are you going to do when you right? I'll finally get to the question, and I'll listen back and I go, okay, my audience doesn't need to hear me think through the question. Let's get rid of all that and just get to the question. So I think editing, there are times when, I have probably listened to 10 episodes of Joe Rogan, and every time I get done with one, I go, that was a good episode. It would have been a great episode if they'd cut out about, 60% of that, because Joe goes all over the place.
BC, I'm going to come to you in a second, but John Domingo, you and I both know him well, Dave.
Yeah.
He's asked a question here in the chat. He said, I just watched an interview where the interviewer kept interrupting the guest with, there's no evidence of that. The guest finally had enough and walked out. How do you handle interviewing someone you disagree with or disagrees with you?
I just did one. A person that he thinks way outside the box. And I just went, well, wait a minute. So are you, like he said, he was talking about how, people do like book clubs, and you'll show up and a whole bunch of people will talk about a book. And his idea was he goes in, and what I didn't realize is he was setting these up ahead of time. The thing I'd heard originally was he just walks in and starts talking about his podcast. And so that's what I did. I said, I understand you do these things where you go out with a projector and you blast your logo on the wall. And I go, are you just walking into Cracker Barrel and going, hey, let's talk about my show? And he started laughing, and he's like, no, that's not how it works. I'm like, okay, because that's what it kind of looked like on Facebook. So that was a case where I was like, that would not be something I recommend. He's like, no, I work with the venue. We set it up. We have a bunch of people. We're all going to talk about this thing. And I was like, okay. But if somebody, instead of me being the antagonist, right? So Ralph says something like yellow and blue make red. And I'm like, okay, Ralph, that's an interesting point. What would you say to the person that said yellow and blue make green? So it's not me. It's the other person that's going to push back on you. So that's another way of doing that. And the other thing was, I saw that interview. They were both talking over each other. A, that's a nightmare for the editor. And B, somebody's, again, what's the key ingredient? You got to listen. So let that person make their point and then go, okay, that's very interesting. What evidence do you have to point to that? And when they say, oh, there's tons of evidence, there's miles of evidence, you go, great, give me one. That drove me nuts. I just heard the woman who runs Inception Point AI, and she said, oh, we've got millions of great shows. They're really popular. And I'm like, great. I just wanted the host to go, name one. Give us one that's a good show. And they didn't. And I was like, that's an example of a follow-up one. I was like, if I ever interview her, that's the question I'm asking her. I've been tempted to reach out to her and go, hey, can we do an interview? It might be a bit of a gotcha because I'm not really a fan of your company. Just to be completely honest, to see if she would come on and go, look, if you can convince me, you might convince others. But on the other hand, I don't want to give that platform a platform. So
I agree, BC. I am going to come to you, but I want to say something Tim Bryan put in the chat. This is for Dave. It says, tell him Tim and Kyle want to hear the story of Binky and the Wiz.
Binky and the Wiz is every 100 episodes, and this is just a Dave thing, because everybody goes, what do I do? And I decided to throw out my, I guess, my regular kind of show, and I do something different. And I got to 400, and I still want to teach people about podcasting. So what I did was I invented a story of Binky and the Wiz, who are radio guys. So these are your typical, and the fun part was Binky is kind of as an exaggerated version of David Lee Roth. The Wiz was his sidekick, and the Wiz has a stutter. And then they have their, there's always a woman in there, and that was, if I remember right, Miss Fatima. And all she said was, Binky, you so crazy. And then Binky was like, hey, what's up, guys? All right, we're going to do it. That thing. And then the Wiz was just, I'm not really sure what's going to, and that whole thing. And so I wrote out a script, and Binky and the Wiz came in, and they captured me and threw me in a closet. And I called my now ex-wife to get me out of the closet. And I said, these crazy radio DJs have thrown me in a closet, and I can't get out. They've taken over my show. And then she named off like 10 or 15, like just really weird radio names that aren't real, but sound like they are. So that was Binky and the Wiz. And I like 400 was a good one. 500 wasn't. I did a thing about Groundhog Day where I kept waking up. 900 was pretty cool because I interviewed Jesus. That was fun, talking about the family business. So every 100 episodes, I throw out my format and do something wacky. But that was Binky and the Wiz.
Before I go to BC, I just want to make a plug for tomorrow on the show, because you mentioned something, Dave, and I don't want you to spend a lot of time talking about it, but you said ex-wives. So tomorrow on the show, we're going to talk about how your podcasting journey affects your family. So make sure you join us tomorrow on the show, because it puts a lot of strain and stress on people. I don't know if you want to comment real quick, Dave, but I do want to go to BC here in a second. But that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Did you have a quick quote about that?
Yeah, be careful, because the internet writes in ink. So I did a show, and I decided for whatever reason I was going to work kind of blue, a little naughty. And I did an episode about if the Amish don't have electricity, that means there's no Amish porn. And then I had all these double entendres, raise my barn, plow my bean field, all this stuff. And I started dating a woman who became my now ex-wife. And I get to meet the kids finally. And the kids Googled Dave Jackson, and what came up, you guessed it, Amish porn. And who they then, of course, told grandma, who luckily thought it was hilarious. But yeah, be careful. When I was doing a show and I was married, she didn't want to be talked about. So if I ever brought up my wife, it was always the nurse. I never said her name until we got married. And she said, okay, you can say Diane now. And I'm like, okay. But realize your family didn't ask to be on the internet. So be very, very careful about that. And I'm sure they'll talk about that tomorrow. That's
exactly right. Go ahead, BC. I apologize for putting you off a little bit, but Dave walked right into that. So I want to make sure we talk about that, but go ahead, BC.
Sure.
No, you're good. That's quite a section to follow up on. But a little while ago, we were talking about sponsors, and I liked your approach to finding magazines or publications and seeing who the advertisers were. For those who may have an ideal sponsor they want to reach out to, but they don't know if they are advertising anywhere else, what kind of additional research would you say is a good approach? Would you just look up their annual reports, or like how would you say to find out whether or not this ideal brand that I think works with me actually has the budget to work with me?
Yeah, first of all, I would go read this book, Sponsor Magnet by Justin Moore. If that's your goal is partnerships, because everything I'm going to say is from this book. He was saying, look at their social, and because many times companies will have like, oh, it's time for the spring sheet sale, and then it's time for this, or that, like, whatever it is based on the year. And then you can reach out to them and say, hey, I saw last year where you guys did the 10 for 10 sale for the blah blah blah. Are you guys doing that again? And then it's kind of like doing a good interview. You've done the work to see what they're doing. And then you go, if you're looking for partners to promote that particular campaign, I've got your target audience over here. and just to get the ball rolling. And then what Justin talks about in his book is we're so used to saying things like, my lovely, give me half a second. Okay, I have a lovely woman from Amazon on my thing, and she's giving me reminders. But we're so used to, oh, I need X amount of money per episode, which kind of makes sense. But he said you really want to sit down and find out what are they trying to do, because there are different types of campaigns. There's like, we love people that are like, we just want to get our word out there. It's just a branding play. Please say our name on our website a million times. That's all we want. And then you have sometimes smaller companies that are like, well, we're selling jeans and we're going to ask you every 3 days, how many times have you run the ad? Because we've only sold 2 pairs of jeans, and we're going to track ROI in insane amounts. And those are really not the people you want as a partnership. You want branding people. But look at what they're doing. Look at their old campaigns. Just stalk them for a bit, and especially on social, because that's what they're using to do. And then when you show them that you've done your homework, hey, I know last fall you did the such and such campaign, because it's probably already still out there. And then you like, I have something similar that we could do on my show if you're interested, yada, yada, yada. And what I see where people shoot themselves in the foot is their imposter syndrome kicks in. And they're like, hey, I know last year you did this great campaign. I thought it'd be great. And boy, that really fits my audience. And here's an example. I've already been an affiliate for your product, and it seems to really resonate with my audience, even though my audience is small and I've only been doing this 6 months, and I'm not really very good. I'm like, no, don't do that. If you've got the right, I've gone on shows that have, in theory, a smaller audience per pod match, and I'm not sure how accurate that is, but nonetheless, if you have the right audience, for me, I will go on your audience. I don't care if you don't have, millions of people. Like, if you've got 30 people listening to your show and it's 30 people that might start a podcast, I will come talk to you. Trust me. So, but that's for people that you can't figure out what their budget is. Just go see what they're doing. And it's the same thing for a guest. I always say, if I want to be a guest on somebody's show, go look at their titles and see what they've done in the past and go, oh, I see you've talked about, online marketing, and you talked about newsletters, and you've talked about this. I don't see an episode about podcasting, and I believe your audience would really benefit from this. And then pitch that idea to the host.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you.
I've got another question from John Jamingo here in the chat. He says, Dave, what podcast format do you find the hardest? Solo, guest, interview, live stream? And what's your favorite format?
My favorite format is what I call NPR. Some people call it narrative style, because every time I do one, I will get more comments than any other format. People are like, that was really cool. And it is. And if I only had one podcast, I would probably do all of mine like that. They just take forever, because I'm doing one right now. I interviewed Rox Codes from Flightcast. Now, a big chunk of that interview was him doing a demo. Well, that's not going to work in audio. Well, as he goes, you'll see here in the upper right-hand corner, like, that's not going to work. So I'm going through and I'm just cutting out snippets that he talked about more of a strategy on YouTube. And so I'm going to end up with all these puzzle pieces over on the right-hand side in Hindenburg. And then I go, great. Now, how can I is there any kind of story arc, or what's the flow going to be? And then once I figure that out, then it's just a matter of like, one of the things you can think about when it comes to YouTube is don't forget to do this. And then you drag the file in, and then after that file's over, and like, it's also a good idea if you do this, drag that thing in. So it's great. It's just one of those, when I get done, I'm like, wow, that took 3 times as long, but the results are also then better. So I like interviews because of the relationship, but there are times when, like I said, I have to edit a lot of me out of it, and I always blame myself. If I have an interview that wasn't like, it was okay, yeah, that wasn't awful, I will always kind of edit that out. So that's the thing for me. Interviews are almost as much editing as a narrative style.
Awesome. I've got Dan Schultz wants to ask a question, Dave. So Dan, go ahead.
Hey, Dave. what you were saying earlier about, in interviews where like one of the biggest things you can do to succeed would be listen. And what you said about, well, I'm just going to ask you, I want to know who you think is either your favorite interviewer or who do you think sucks. And I'm just going to real quick, you made me think of Larry King
Yeah.
when like this guy, man, he could be interviewing somebody and the guest could say, well, Larry, I'm happy to be on the show as the third man to ever set foot on the moon. I've never told this story before, but you will not believe what happened 30 seconds I got off the flying saucer spaceship thing I was on. And Larry will just be like, do you eat cheese? Do you
Right.
keep in shape? And it's like, are you not listening at all?
Yeah, my favorite Larry King is when he kind of knew who Jerry Seinfeld was, and they had just done the
I
finale,
know this one.
and he was kind of like, "So did you get canceled?" And he's like, "Did I get canceled? What, Larry? What do you know?" It's like so Larry was not my favorite. To me, and Larry's answer was, "Well, I want to be just like the audience and come in blank." This sounds very weird. I have a window guy who is showing up very early to my house. Can you can I answer that question in 10 seconds?
Yeah.
I unfortunately have to go answer that. He's here like hours early. So
It's no problem, Dave. This is what
I'll be right
happens when
back.
you do live recording. So,
Ralph, I honestly thought that Dave was going to say, my favorite interviewer, though, is this guy. He's doing my windows right now.
yeah, that's what I thought was going to happen. See, you got to love live stuff because when you have a live show, this is what happens in a live show. But that's what happens. So we'll give Dave a second. But again, don't forget to join us tomorrow. We're going to be talking about surviving relationships while doing podcasting. I think it's really going to be a great show. And also, bring your wins of the week because next week we're going to have wins of the week again.
Right.
So Dave is back. The window guy has been checked in. So now you can answer that question, Dave.
Yeah, he's 20 minutes early.
Well, at least he's not late. Let's give him that, right?
So who does a really good interview is Jordan Harbinger. And Jordan Harbinger does the work. He will talk about how he does not have an author on the show until he reads the book. And people are like, wait, what? Like, yeah. And I'm here to tell you, as someone who has a book and someone who is now out of breath, I can tell when somebody's read the back cover of the book and somebody who's actually read the book. And you just get a better interview when you know the content. So, so I would say Larry King, I was never a fan of his stuff. And, Poughkeepsie, you're on, and Jordan Harbinger does a really good interview.
Cool.
Thank you, Dan. So we're going to pivot to post-interview here in a second, but Gabe in the chat asked a question. He says, when should a new podcast decide whether to start a website for their show?
Before you launch. That's really it. So you've recorded your episode, you've gotten some feedback from people. And by that, I mean, you've gotten some feedback from people. And if you haven't already, you should get some feedback from people because everybody skips that step. And then they wonder, why isn't my show growing? And I always say an author has, like my book, I went through 5 edits before they went to the public. Athletes have preseason, actors have dress rehearsal, musicians spend a lot of time in the basement practicing before they go public. And yet you just recorded the very first thing you've ever recorded and you go, I want this thing out of here. And you publish it and then wonder why it's not resonating because you published a rough draft. So what you can use the website for is to start building up your email list, sign up here and be notified the minute that this goes. And then you can also put your episode there and get some feedback before you actually go, oh, this one's ready for the public. So it's your website, and people go, of course you're going to say that. You work for a website company, but I've been saying this for 20 years. Your website is your home. This is it, your home base. And then you got your Instagrams and your Snapface and all the other different social places around it, so that one of those is not the cool place to be anymore. You're good to go. Or if you get kicked off of YouTube, people know where to find you. This is my home base. And it really is something you want to just build on top of, because as much as we, Ralph, what if somebody wants to do a spotlight, where do they go?
They go to podcastingmorningshow.com/spotlight.
So he's reinforcing his brand. He said his domain name again, and he's given a quick, easy way for people to, leave their spotlight. So your website that's your home base. And so, and, get your episode, get your media host. I'm a big fan of Captivate and Buzzsprout, not Spotify. If you need free, rss.com or Red Circle. But once you get that done and you've got something hosted, you can go ahead and, put that on your website to get some feedback. And then from there, once you're done, then you can really start, using your website for all sorts of fun stuff.
Now, Carrie Brett, do you want to make a comment, Carrie? Carrie just joined us on stage. She mentioned that she had interviewed somebody. Carrie, are you with us?
Yes. I interviewed Jordan Harbinger for my show.
Yeah.
And it was very, very interesting. He had just interviewed Matthew McConaughey at the time. And I was really excited to get him because he's the original Hitch, the movie Hitch. Do you guys remember that with Will Smith?
All right.
And I heard him. Before I knew who he was, I heard him on the Jasmine Star Show. And the only reason why I was listening to the Jasmine Star Show is because I'm a professional photographer and I was on the speaking circuit with Jasmine back in the day for professional photographers. And I heard him speak and I'm like, he's like the male version of me. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And
Jordan
we
is
had a lot in common.
Yeah, Jordan is
Huh?
one of those non-BS kind of guys. That's what I love anytime I ever have him on the show, he will just say, well, it has to be good. And by good, I mean exceptional. And it's like, this is what you need to do. And most people don't do that. And Jordan's not afraid to say that.
Thank you, Carrie. I want to pivot I'm sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Really did a lot of amazing things and he deserves a lot of credit.
He does.
Thank you, Carrie. I want to pivot to our last section today, Dave, because the whole reason I had you on is talk about creating remarkable interviews. Yeah. And what I have seen is most podcast advice stops the moment the guest hangs up. And they say, okay, you've done it, you're great. But I got a suspicion that you think about I want you to tell us what you think about after the interview that you need to do as well. Talk us about the follow-through, Dave, because I know that's important to what you do. You've talked about editing once, but I think there's more to that than you wanted to talk about right now, right?
Yeah, it's usually, and I at times want to kick myself because I'll forget to do this, but you want to make sure you let the guest know that it's available, hey, your show's live, here's the link, and give them everything you can. So here's and I recently changed this. When you give them a piece of artwork and it matches your brand, they're probably more likely to share it if it matches their brand. So if your colors are blue and yellow and their colors are brown and beige, you might want to make that brown and beige because it'll match their stuff. But so much of just like, hey, our episode is live and that's it. But if you go, hey, our episode is live, here's a built-in tweet or something to share on Threads or Instagram or whatever, and you give them the typical kind of rectangle image and a square one, whatever it is, it's so easy to do in Canva to make multiple versions of that and then thank them for that and, just make it super easy so that in the event you did do an episode that was kind of thinking outside the box and not the same old kind of questions, they're much more likely to share it. But also in the early days, I still do this, but I would probably say I'm more of a C grade instead of A or B on this, is every now and then just follow up with people to go, hey, I haven't talked to you since we did our interview, 6 months ago. What's up? What's new and exciting? Anything than that? And they'll same old, whatever. And you're like, great, talk to you later, just to say hi, so that in the event somebody goes, hey, do you know a podcast guy? And they go, you know what? I do. Dave Jackson does this thing. And so because for me, the biggest benefit of interviews is the relationships you can build with people. And so when this person knows you and somebody asks them and they say, oh, you need to talk to this guy, so now you know that guy. and then it just builds and builds and builds. One of my favorite examples is I was the head of the new media show, or not the new media show, new media expo, and I got to hire Pat Flynn to talk. So that was the first time I got to know Pat. And I was at an event talking to Pat because I knew Pat now. And Michael Stelzner walked up, who I kind of knew, who runs social media marketing world. And so Michael knew Pat and was talking to Pat, which means he was also talking to me, which means I got to kind of share some of my expertise. And the next thing you know, I'm talking to social media marketing world because I knew Pat, who knew Michael, who knew, and it's all about the relationship. So don't let that the last time you talk to somebody be your interview. Reach out every now and then, even if it's been a year. It seems kind of weird. And again, where do I get that idea from? Jordan Harbinger. So follow up with people just to keep those relationships going.
Yeah, and I think it really is all about relationships. Now, someone asked something earlier that I think is a perfect segue to what I want to ask you about now, because you talked about these follow-up steps. How are you using AI in your content creation specifically, Dave? We talk a lot about AI on this show, and you have to be under a rock right now to not hear about AI all the time. And the thing that struck me is this is probably a great use for AI to create those images and things like that. But where are you using AI to be sort of a superpower right now, Dave?
Yeah, I use AI on my images in some cases, depending on how much time I have, because I can make your typical, what is that stuff? It's not B-roll, but public images in Canva, and I just type in, give me a chart, and there's a chart, and there it is, where if I'm like, show me in, a striped shirt next to a chalkboard, et cetera, AI in some cases it looks cooler, but it takes longer. So that's usually the way it works. The less time you spend on it, the not so cool it looks, vice versa. So there's that. The other thing I just did is I did an interview with a friend. Now, the good news is I get to catch up with my friend. The bad news is we went on so many tangents because we're friends that really, and I went in and I transcribed it and I said, find the parts where we're kind of off topic and give me timestamps. And it did. It was like from 3 minutes and 10 seconds to 4 minutes and 27. You guys talked about this. So I now can go in and cut out the stuff. I don't have to listen to the whole thing, even though I'm going to anyway, but it gives me an idea where to look. And then I just did this last week, and I'm not sure if I'm going to do it every week, but it was pretty interesting. I had my show in my head. I had my bullet points. I recorded the whole thing. Didn't do all the fancy schmancy. I just want the content out, transcribed it, threw it into ChatGPT and said, this is my episode. How could I make it better? And it said, well, if you move this at the beginning and you did this, it ended up being the 4 C's of something, which it didn't make up. I had said all those 4 C's, but they weren't together. And it said, if you put these together, it's a thing. And then I was like, and I looked at it and asked myself, okay, I'm the human here. Is that better? And I went, that is more organized. And I think it'll be more effective on the content. And so I basically said, give me a bullet outline of the thing that you just said, because I don't want to read a script. And it said, okay, here's your bullet points. And then I just stayed on track with those. And it was like, that was, in the end, I think it made a better episode. Now, I recorded my episode twice, so it takes more time. But in the end, I now look at that first one as kind of the rough draft. And the second one is like, okay, that was practice. This one's for real. And so that was something that I go, am I going to do that every week? I'm not sure I'm going to have the time to do that, but I think in the end, I made a better episode.
Now, you work with a lot of new podcasters, Dave. And while we're talking about AI, do you see a lot of new folks calling it in with AI, just trying to use AI to do everything? And what do you think about that?
I don't, when they work with me, they kind of know, they've heard my show. So they've heard me say, don't let AI make the content, write the content, speak the content, like use it to enhance what you made. So I don't run into that a lot. But when I do interviews, there are many a times when I'm like going, I get the feeling all these questions came from AI. And so that's something I hear sometimes. But I do see in Facebook groups where people are like, well, I just use AI for that. And I just and then if you are doing anything looking at AI, when you go back to Facebook, there was one, it was like record nothing and say everything or something like that. But it was all just, you just type it in and it will, and make you millions and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's not good. So
Go ahead, BC. I know you got a question.
Yeah, to follow up with that, so recently I saw an article from Brains Magazine talking about how you're not AI, so stop communicating like one. It's from a author or writer named David Fisher, and he talks about in his article about how, despite how clean, cookie cutter, and kind of pristine AI can help make our communications, it still lacks this human. It lacks the human in it, and it lacks our ability to sound messy and sometimes irrational, which helps us translate better to other people. I was wondering if and when you're working with someone who kind of has a very AI forward approach, what your thoughts on that are and how you would kind of break that down for them as well.
yeah, I've seen multiple people that have gone into Riverside and have it remove the filler words to where it doesn't sound good anymore, because we need time to figure out what our next word is. So there are these little
Mhm.
pauses. And now it's just somebody who talks over and over and over, and the words are kind of weird, and every now and then, and it's like, ugh. So yes, it did the editing for you. And that's anything with AI. Like, look, it can do this. Okay, great. But is it any good? Look, it
Mhm.
rewrote this sales page and it only took me like a minute and a half. That would have taken me 3 hours. Okay, great. How are sales now? Are they up?
Mhm.
Well, no, so that's the thing that I see people, I'm always like, don't people connect with people? Like we could, I
Mhm.
live in about an hour south of Cleveland, and I remember I would go up and watch LeBron James play basketball. And one of the things that people don't talk about is his passes are insane. They're super fast, and he has eyes in the back of his head. And so we could probably get a robot to throw it just as fast as accurate as LeBron James, but I won't connect with that because now I'm like, oh man, that dude's 41 and he's still crushing it. Way to go, LeBron. So I can
Mhm.
connect with it. I can't connect with like, oh, that's a cool piece of technology, but okay, whatever. So lean into your humanness. I still, as much, even if I have an outline, I'm just the way my brain works. I'm ADHD. I've never been like officially diagnosed, but talk to me for 10 minutes and
Same.
you're like, yeah, that guy's all over the place. And so when I have a bullet points, I will still, throw in a tangent every now and then. And so what I do is just make fun of myself. I have a jingle that's like, okay, here comes another 10-second tangent, and I'm like, well, and if it applies to what I'm actually talking about, or if I think my audience would still like this tangent, even though it's a tangent, I'll leave it in there. A lot of times I'll cut them out, but there are times that I'm like, no, they'll still care about this. So,
No, I love that. I love that. Going back to when you were talking about your prep sheets, when I do mine too, similar to you, I give topic ideas, but I always say in the prep sheet, this is not verbatim script. This
right.
is not in order. We're gonna pivot. I go by BC Babbles on podcasts, so if that tells you anything right there. So I love that approach.
Yeah. And you have to know yourself. I'll give you an example. If I'm given, uh, let's say 40 minutes to talk and they go, so if you could cut it at 30 minutes and leave 10 minutes for questions, that'd be great. I will purposely write my script to be 25 minutes, 5 minutes sooner. Why? Because my brain is going to call an audible somewhere in there. I'm going to throw in an extra joke or something. So I'm like, and I get done after I've thrown in something new and I'm right at 30 minutes. So you kind of have to know who you are and how you work. And like, okay, I don't want to try to turn me into something that I'm not. So,
Right.
um, yeah.
Thank you, BC. I want to go to Carrie, and then I'm going to ask you the last question, Dave. But Carrie has a comment about AI. Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, I love the example of LeBron James. Now, sorry, I have a return. Do you guys hear it?
That's all right. I can still hear you.
Ok- Okay. Julian Edelman is a Patriots player who
Yeah.
can turn on a dime on the field, right? He's
He's
the smallest guy
from
and
Kent
he's
State,
just so
Ohio.
scrappy. Oh, yeah, people love him.
Yeah.
So he's another example of like humanness and spirit. But what I wanted to say about AI is, and Jordan Harbinger again, Jordan Harbinger is very specific in his questions. And I think that separates him as far as an interviewer. And I interviewed Ellen Hildebrand, who's a famous writer, and she was like, specific, I can't say the word, specific, being specific will set you apart. And AI is not that. So that's what I just want to say.
Yeah, I interviewed a woman from the show Big Lash Energy, and I to make a long story short, I got surprised that this was on my calendar, one of those where I didn't do the research. So I was like, oh crap. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, I'm interviewing, I cannot remember her name. But anyway, give me 10 questions that she hasn't been asked before. And it gave me 10 questions and they were unique. But luckily, we had technical issues. She was in a place with really bad internet. So we pushed it back a week. I then went back and listened to like 4 of her episodes, and I was so happy because she had a great story and all sorts of insights and such. And had I actually been like, okay, well, I asked her a bunch of questions. So the reason Jordan asked such good questions is because he did the work. He read the book. He's done his research. And so that was a lesson of mine. I'm like, yep, ChatGPT gave me questions that she hadn't been asked before. But A, they weren't the questions my audience would have asked if they were sitting in my chair. And B, I would have really missed a great episode. So,
All right, Dave, final question for today. If you could give every podcaster in our community one piece of advice that would immediately make their next guest interview more remarkable, what would it be?
do the work. Do the work. And so this is why people don't do the work is because they've said, I'm doing a weekly show and they're great. And I'm going to go to Podmatch and I'm going to get a bunch of guests and everything's great. And then they try to basically squeeze their life into their podcast schedule. And it turns out, and Ralph's going to talk about this tomorrow, your family and things like that. And so that doesn't work. You have to look at your life and go, wow, that took me 9 hours to do a 50-minute podcast. Okay, do you have 9 hours a week to do a podcast? No. And that's when you don't do the work. That's when you're like, I'll just read the back of the book. Oh, I'll just ask ChatGPT. When you do the work, you come up with much better content. And so if you go, well, no, I don't have 9 hours a week. Okay, do you have 9 hours every other week? Maybe. Okay, well, then maybe you're doing a bi-weekly show or you're going to do a shorter show. Or maybe you're not doing interviews because those take up a lot of time. So that would be my advice. Do the work because in theory, if I wanted to, I could probably go to Perplexity and get a lot of these answers a heck of a lot quicker than listening to your 20-minute interview. So it's got to be something different than that. And, get your personality in there, get the personality of the guest in there, and do the work. It's all about the content.
I agree, Dave, and that really sums it up. Dave, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to contact you? And thank you so much for being here today, but how can they contact you best?
Yeah, my main website, schoolofpodcasting.com. And of course, if you need a website, go over to podpage.com.
So I will throw one more question here. Gabe had a question about, let me find it. Oh, what's the most vital element that should be included in your website? We'll close out with that. What's the most vital element in your website? Because you deal with websites every day through Podpage.
As always, it's a podcast question, so it depends. If you're trying to grow your audience, get your Apple and Spotify links up front. If you're trying to make money with your podcast, work on a good lead magnet and have that newsletter right up front. Those are the two biggies.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you so much for being here today. And I want to remind everybody to make sure you join us tomorrow for Wins of the Week Friday. We're going to talk about keeping those relationships strong while you're podcasting. So, Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everybody, make it a great day.